Hello, 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 everybody. It is going to be a fun night tonight. You guys, of course, I'm Susie McMahon, and we are going live for our virtual book club meeting for the month of February to talk about the featured wonderful novel, The Prince of TIDES by Pat Conroy. And tonight we have my group expert, I pointed the right way, Karen Wiese from Texas, and then the Pat Conroy Literary Center and all things Pat Conroy and all things Low Country expert, Jonathan Haupt. Hi, you guys.
Hey.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. I think two of us are coming live from South Carolina and one from the Dallas area. That's you, Karen. I see people rolling in. Welcome, everybody. Make sure to list in the comments where you're watching from, if you could. That always makes it really fun. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off tonight's meeting with reading Jonathan Haupt's bio. Everybody, Jonathan, on the bottom part of the screen here, is the executive director of the nonprofit, the Conroy Center, and the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, where he created Story River Books fiction imprint along with Pat Conroy. It was named by Garden and Gun magazine as one of the, quote, top 10 things to love about the South, end quote. Haupt's book reviews and author interviews have appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier, Low Country Weekly, Beaufort Lifestyle, Savannah Morning News, Beacon Magazine, Southern Review of Books, and Southern Writers Magazine, Sweet Tea Blog. He is the co-editor, which we talked about, I think, in November and December, the collection of memories and tributes to our Prince of Scribes, Pat Conroy, where the writers remember Pat Conroy, the recipient of 17 book awards. Congratulations. He serves on the board of Friends of South Carolina Libraries and South Carolina Academy of Authors. In 2020, Haupt was recognized with the Doug Marlett Literacy Leadership Award presented by the Pulpwood Queens, which has a few more members than ours. It's the largest book club in the United States. Welcome, Jonathan. We're so glad to have you back here with us tonight to discuss the incredible novel, The Prince of Scribes. Or excuse me, let's get it right, The Prince of TIDES.
There you go. It happens. It happens. We all do it. Thank you.
Yes. And I'm going to let Karen start asking you the first question. And I just wanted to let everybody know Shoshana's right on time. Welcome, Shoshana, and I'll look for comments in Messenger from her. Yeah. Go ahead with the first question, Karen. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Jonathan, first of all, this is such a thrill to speak with you again after seeing you in March last year at the center. Anyway, two of the themes that kind of stuck out for me were one, the deep sense of place and belonging to a place that Tom has in his Southern roots, and it just permeates all of his stories when he's doing the flashbacks. And the other is the idea of family loyalty, sticking together, sticking up for each other. Pat was a military brat, as am I. So I sort of marveled at how Pat, whose own childhood involved moving around all the time, could capture so eloquently the depth of Tom's rootedness in the South. And the passages describing his childhood and the magic of the natural world, growing up in the Low Country, just were rendered in such exquisite detail and were just almost achingly beautiful to me. And then at the end of the book, in some of the extra material, there's a quote from Pat. He says, "The children of warriors in our country learn the grace and caution that come from a permanent sense of estrangement. I grew up in 20 versions of the South and was part of none of them." So just again, sort of emphasizing how did he come by this ability to describe Tom's childhood in so much detail and make it so real. And it just kind of struck me that maybe these two things, this sense of place and family loyalty, were really two sides of one theme, which was a deep desire to belong and to be from somewhere. And I just wondered if you could elaborate on some of the influences that made Pat Conroy such, such a great Southern writer.
Oh, that's an excellent question. Excellent pair of questions, and very thoughtfully phrased too, Karen. I think you get exactly to the heart of it. So much of this book is about belonging to a tribe, a family in this case, and to a place. And this is, I mean, just to put it in the larger context of Pat's writing life, sort of who he is. This is a book that comes out in 1986. Film comes out a couple of years later in 1991. The Water is Wide came out 1972, right? So we're years past that. Pat has been gone from a full-time resident in the Low Country for, what is that, 16, 17 years at that point. So he's lived everywhere else in the country, right? The Great Santini is written in Atlanta, even though it's set in a fictional version of Beaufort. Lords of Discipline is set in Charleston, clearly, but he's writing that in Paris. Prince of Tides is written primarily in Rome. He's not physically in the place that he's describing here, which is why he's immersing himself so deeply into his imagination to try and recreate not the world he would see if he looked out the window, but the idealized world of a trying to remember it through the scope of a child, of a young person, of a teenager, in a lot of Tom's case. And here's Tom Wingo, who people immediately equate with Pat Conroy. They want Tom and Pat to be sort of equivalent. Mm-hmm. Pat's not from Beaufort. He wasn't born in the Low Country. He came here when he was 16. Tom is the kid who grew up in the Low Country, who was birthed into this world with his twin sister and his older brother. And I would argue that all three of the Wingo kids are actually versions of Pat. He's put a little bit of himself into all three of them. He's created this tight-knit group of siblings that he, the author, sort of, wishes he could belong to, because they're, at this point in Pat's life, much closer than the actual Conroy siblings are, right? So this is sort of an idealized circle of siblings, and he uses that word circle a lot in this book in a lot of ways. So I think that idea of belonging, of closing that circle, of embracing himself in an idealized place and an idealized family, particularly among the relationships that the siblings share, is really something that the writer wishes he had in his actual life at that point, but doesn't. So, we get this really this idealized, this almost mythological place that people came to Beaufort, came to the Low Country to see if it was real, and the book convinced them that it was real. And they wanted to stay. That's true for so many people who came to Beaufort for the first time because of the way Pat described it in this book. For so many of Pat's readers, this is quintessential Pat Conroy at the absolute top of his game. And when Stephanie and I were interviewed by Susie in December, I remember she shared the story of being in New York in the mid-1980s when this book came out. And people would ask her where she was from, and she would describe Beaufort in this magical terminology, and they would say, please. And then this comes out, and she's like, see? And then everybody believed her. This is Pat Conroy, one-man chamber of commerce, inviting everybody to the Low Country because he described it so well. But he wasn't actually there. He wasn't actually there when he was writing this. And I think that makes the descriptions even more powerful, really.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've been checking the real estate listings.
I might have a lot for you, so hold on. Make sure to talk to me first. No, just kidding. Well, Jonathan and Karen, I think that's just a wonderful way to start off our conversation. And I'm going to tell Shoshana, she sent back some brief reflections, but it's so long, sweetheart. I'm afraid I'm going to butcher your thoughts. So please, Shoshana, formalize one question and put it in the comments here, and I'll be happy to ask that. And I will share these thoughts in the show notes at the end, Shoshana, since you've got an incredible, it's almost a novel itself. It's beautifully written. But my follow-up question, Jonathan, is tell me honestly, when was the first time that you read The Prince of Tides? And did you then open it back up like we all have just done and what I experienced is I was blown away because I think I read it when I was in high school, and opening the book again, instead of watching the movie again, instead of just what I kind of remember, I was blown away by his writing, the literary descriptions, and I just literally feeling like it was a paintbrush of the Low Country from the prologue and on throughout the novel. I mean, I'm sure you've read it or parts of it multiple times. Did you have a similar experience if there were years from the first time you read it until another time you read it?
Obviously, I've read it many times by now,
Yeah.
but the first time I read it, I think I was in graduate school, and it was after I had seen the movie. It was because I had seen the movie that I read it. The only two Conroy books I had read before I came to South Carolina in 2004 were The Great Santini and Prince of Tides. And in both cases, it was after seeing the movie that the movie convinced me, would really like to see this book. I'd like to read it. And what I remember is looking on the first pass through, looking at both of those books, seeing that they had been written about 10 years apart, and just thinking, my God, he came a long way in 10 years. This is incredible. For the very reason that you described. There's very little poetry. There's very little lyrical language in The Great Santini, except for the last chapter, which is mostly lyrical, which is Pat sort of experimenting late in the novel in a very specific way. When you get to The Prince of Tides 10 years later, it's like every line is a prose poem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the kind of book that really demands to be read multiple times, once for the plot, once for the nuance of language or the lyrical beauty of it, and just to kind of try and understand, how do you build a sentence? How do you get to be that good at your craft? Because this is really an incredible book. And there are layers upon layers of stories in this. It's incredible in that way. And at one point, the book just comes to a complete stop and you get a completely different book, right? There's the novel within a novel, which is so beautifully inserted into the story as well. It's just a brilliantly constructed book, very well edited, in addition to the writing style. So, I probably read it 3 or 4 times before I even felt I even began to understand just how good a writer Pat was, just how good a novel this is.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, I mean, so much has happened since 2020 with the start of this virtual book club and me having roots here again after just visiting the Low Country as a child with my family. I've learned a lot about him, and it still was. It's just mind blowing. And it's one that I don't want to rush. And to be honest with you, I haven't finished completely this time around because I want to just enjoy it in a beach chair and relish it. With that, one of the things that we talked about, everybody, beforehand is we're going to go into the book and pick out a few passages that resonated with us, and then talk about why it resonates so much for us and to us or with us, whatever the proper pronoun is there. I'm sorry. And I was going to start with Karen, and then I was going to go, and then Jonathan, I'm going to let you wrap it up because then you can keep on talking about some things. But Karen, if you could share your passage, I believe it's from the prologue, and then explain to you why that touched you.
Okay. Well, I picked this one out. It's in the early part of the book, every time he talks about his mother, it's almost like a love letter, and the magic that she brought to their childhood. And I sort of think of my own mother that way a little bit as well. She was also into natural things and a gardener and someone who knew a lot about the natural world. And anyway, so I picked this out. And this is on page 5 in the prologue. One bright summer night when we were very small and the humid air hung like moss over the Low Country, my sister and brother and I could not sleep. Our mother took us out of the house, Savannah and I with summer colds and Luke with a heat rash, and walked all of us down to the river and out onto the dock. I have a surprise for my darlings, our mother said, as we watched a porpoise move toward the Atlantic through the still metallic waters. We sat at the end of the floating dock and stretched our legs, trying to touch the water with our bare feet. There's something I want you to see, something that will help you sleep. Look over there, children, she said, pointing out toward the horizon to the east. It was growing dark on this long southern evening, and suddenly, at the exact point her finger had indicated, the moon lifted a forehead of stunning gold above the horizon, lifted straight out of filigreed, light, intoxicated clouds that lay on the skyline in attendant veils. Behind us, the sun was setting in a simultaneous, congruent withdrawal, and the river turned to flame in a quiet duel of gold. The new gold of moon astonishing and ascendant, the depleted gold of sunset extinguishing itself in the long westward slide. It was the old dance of days in the Carolina marshes, the breathtaking death of days before the eyes of children until the sun vanished, its final signature a ribbon of bullion strung across the tops of water oaks. The moon then rose quickly, rose like a bird from the water, from the trees, from the islands, and climbed straight up, gold, then yellow, then pale silver, silver bright, then something miraculous, immaculate, and beyond silver, a color native only to southern nights. We children sat transfixed before that moon our mother had called forth from the waters. When the moon had reached its deepest silver, my sister, Savannah, though only 3, cried aloud to our mother, to Luke and me, to the river and to the moon, "Oh, Mama, do it again." And I had my earliest memory.
It's a beautiful scene. Yeah. I often think of that as in parallel to a scene that happens a little bit later where the mother brings Tom into a room and tells him that he's the special one, right? Of the 3 siblings, all her hopes and dreams pin entirely on him. And she believes and loves him the best, right? And he realizes later, oh, she's done this with the other 2 as well, right? I mean, she does have this sort of magical way with language and sort of bringing her children into the world as she wants them to experience it. But there's a manipulation at the heart of that every time too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, for reading that and choosing that. And I was going to start mine is in chapter 6. And I think you both will know why I picked this as soon as I did. I hope that I don't have too long of a excerpt here, but this is referring to the grandmother, Tom Wingo's grandmother. She arrived in Colleton somewhat exhausted and threadbare. Very significantly, she also came into our town penniless. My mother would do the figures out loud and a bit of obsessive calculations of assets lost and moaned that Talita had gone through more than $100,000. But if she had surprised her family and her town by satisfying some innate lust to travel, she shocked them when when it came settling down again. Unknown to any of us, she had reopened the diplomatic channels with my grandfather, rekindled whatever amenity or affection the Depression had extinguished, and wrote him engaging sisterly letters throughout her, I can't even say this word, I'm going to skip it. Anyway, you might know what it is off the top of your head. So that's a
Picaresque.
What?
Is it picaresque?
No, Perginations. I need a purginations. I need my my dictionary. Whew. Whether out of a sense of privacy or tact, he never mentioned those letters to anyone. My grandfather Wingo was the only one in town who was not stunned when our grandmother arrived back in Colleton after an absence of more than 20 years and went directly to the house on Barnwell Street, unpacked her clothes, and placed them in the same chest of drawers she had abandoned so long ago. This is part of the quote I like. Even as seabirds got to rest sometime was the only thing she offered as an explanation to anyone. 10 trunks full of the most marvelous and useless exotica followed her to Colleton, and her house overflowed with much of the eccentric memorabilia of the planet that had struck her fancy. My grandfather's living room, which had been so quintessentially Southern, filled up with Africa masks and art, ceramic, elephants from Thailand, and trinkets from every bazaar she had plundered in Asia. Each item had a story behind it, a country, a specific set of adventures, and she could retrace her steps by letting her eyes circle the room. Her secret, we would discover, was that once you have traveled, the voyage never ends, but it is played out over and over in the quietest chambers that the mind can never break off from the journey. So I absolutely love that last line. I love the whole page. It's so visual. And I relate to it because I'm in the travel industry. And, you know, even in our minds, we think, oh, I want to travel nonstop for 6 weeks or 7 weeks or 8 weeks. And that part about even a seabird needs to rest is so true. I experienced it last summer. And I think we all have homes and we have roots because we need time to process that journey. You can't constantly be on one. But I love that quote. Anyway.
Yeah, both of those quotes, that line and the last one, I think get used a lot out of context. It's kind of in isolation as quotable Conroy. The grandmother Pat is basing all that on is his real grandmother, Stanny. So his mother's mother, Peg's mother, who did something very much like that, was just sort of left and was a world traveler for a while until she wasn't and came back home. And there she was reinserting herself into the family. Pat writes a lot about the real Stanny in Death of Santini, some hilarious remembrances of her in that book. But this idealized version of her, and particularly in that passage that you just read, Susie, it's lovely. It's powerful.
That's neat. Thank you so much for those.
One of my favorite characters. Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, what did you pick out?
So the passage that I'm going to read is kind of adjacent to what Karen read. It's also from the prologue. And for those of you who've been to the Conroy Center, you might remember that we actually have a handwritten facsimile of the prologue in one of the display cases. So you can read all of these words in Pat's writing. It's lovely. And this is just 2 short paragraphs, but they're two of the most often quoted paragraphs from Pat's writing because they so perfectly, so beautifully and lyrically capture the Low Country. We always say about Southern writing, you never have to guess where a Southern novel takes place because somebody's going to tell you, and it's going to be the only place that story could take place. And this is sort of Pat proving that. So this is Tom Wingo speaking here. To describe growing up in the Low Country of South Carolina, I would have to take you to the marsh on a spring day, flush the great blue heron from its silent occupation, scatter marsh hens as we sink to our knees in the mud, open you an oyster with a pocket knife and feed it to you from the shell and say, there, that taste, that's the taste of my childhood. I would say, breathe deeply, and you would breathe and remember that smell for the rest of your life. The bold, fecund aroma of the tidal marsh, exquisite and sensual. The smell of the South in heat. The smell like new milk, semen, and spilled wine, all perfumed with seawater. My soul grazes like a lamb on the beauty of indrawn tides. Isn't that perfect? Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
It is lovely.
When I talk about Pat as failed poet, which is the way he described himself, this is one of the passages I point to because I can take this in prose form in paragraph, line after line, and insert line breaks into it and make it look more like a poem. And I'm just sort of following the sound of my imagined sense of the cadence of Pat's voice when I do that. And you can see it. You can see there is a real intentional poem here. Hidden in this paragraph, and with a couple of edits, which leaves the South smelling just like new milk and not the other things. I teach fourth graders because they don't need to know about some of that, as a descriptive writing exercise, and they get it immediately. This is a tool for letting them understand how you can use all 5 of your senses in describing something, how you can bring a reader, how you can communicate a sense of place to another person just with words alone, if they're the right words, if you really hit all 5 senses in the right combination. The other reason I'm so drawn to this is I go out and I see it every day. I mean, I begin and end my day with a walk along Battery Creek because I live in a neighborhood that has a trail system. And I see the great blue heron in his silent occupation, if I'm lucky every day, but usually about once a week. So I'm always thinking about this passage and how lucky I am to live in these words now, to be here, not just on the page, but in person. So I absolutely love these lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I have some guests staying out on Fripp Island right now, and I took them to Morgan River Grill over on Dawtaw the other night, and it was what night? That was Sunday. It was after several days of overcast weather, to have bright blue Carolina blue skies again, and to have the sunset just light up the entire sky. We got into the restaurant and I sat there and I said, "Don't you just feel like you drove through a Pat Conroy novel?" Like, yes, I said, "Yeah, we did." I mean, just seeing the long marsh views and seeing that sunset. Anyway, it was fun. Karen, do you have another question for Jonathan about the Prince of Tides specifically? I might be putting you on the spot.
No,
Let us just
you are.
keep conversing a little bit. While you're thinking, I can do a couple comments here. Lynn Tripson is commenting all over, saying perfect, and she's got so many fun little comments in here, just saying that. And then we have, "I love that quote, Jonathan, and will remember those lines and 5 cents taste of the Low Country for the rest of my life." Donette Lee has said, "Jonathan, that reading calls to my mind your Facebook photographs from the early morning walks. Thank you for sharing your wonderful photography for that."
Thank you.
Sure. And Karen, did you have something else?
Well, about the book specifically, yeah. I guess I could throw this one out. Let's see. Well, of course, we've talked about the lyricism of the book and how magical all the description is, but of course, it's all punctuated then by the abuse that they suffered. And well, this is the other thing that sort of occurred to me. You'd get kind of lulled in by all this description. It's so beautiful, and then all of a sudden, wham! There'd be this horrific scene, and it occurred to me that is what it's like to be abused. They never knew when it was coming.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I just found that interesting too, that he could write it in such a way that you just feel that.
It's meant to be shocking. It's meant to shock you out of place of calm and beauty and wonderment and magic every time it happens. And we've got the abusive father at one end, and then we have a literal giant, right, at the other end of the spectrum. There are no shortage of bad guys in this book. It's a very dangerous world in which these Wingo children are living, and danger can come from expected places, from a figure who's always in the home. It can show up at the back door when you're feeling protected too. And that's what A Southern Way, the book within a book, right? The children's book that is in no way child friendly.
That was an interesting book. Yeah.
It's like, wow, it's Pat Conroy's version of Beastmaster. I love this. This is great. But that's what it's about too. I mean, he spends a lot of time in that children's book, which is Pat Conroy writing as Savannah Wingo, writing a disassociated self as Renarda Halpern. So seemingly pretty far removed from the actual Pat Conroy, but lulling you into this beautiful landscape. But there's danger coming. There's big, bad danger coming when you don't expect it. And that's the way that he lived as a child of abuse. That's the way the whole family lived. That was echoed in his Citadel experiences as well. There are multiple instances in Pat's life when he didn't know where the attack was going to come from next. And at the time that he was writing this book, if I remember this right, and I believe I do, there were a lot of legal issues with the ex-husband of his second wife, Lenore. There was being attacked in that sense as well as, the family under fire in a very different way also. So you get that sense of it, that sense of this is a precarious, dangerous world. It's beautiful, yes, but danger can come from any direction at any time too.
Right.
And yet there was forgiveness too then, because at the end, his father becomes more of a sympathetic character, and it's his mother who's the manipulative, person who
vote for him,
sold the family farm.
It has her attempt at a redemptive moment in the end there too. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to share Shoshana's comment here. She says the Prince of Tides and Pat Conroy's other books are so tortured. I think that's a good descriptive word. Was he tortured in person? Maybe this was therapy for him. And I know you've talked a lot about this, Jonathan. How would you answer Shoshana's question?
The Pat that I knew, which was the late in life Pat Conroy. So I knew him best from the age of 65 to 70, the last 5 years of his life, and a little bit off and on before that. Was one of the most gregarious and naturally funny people I'd ever met. But he had committed himself to doing the work to get him to that spot. When he was working on this book and Beach Music, which came after this, he was really at a low point emotionally in his life. And he was working with counselors off and on. And Lowenstein is a composite of several of those therapists, one or two in particular. She's also incidentally a terrible therapist. Let's just put that out there, right? This is not an instructive guide to how to be a
therapist.
Yes, no, not be Susan Lowenstein. She's a fascinating character, absolutely fascinating character, but not a particularly professional person, let's say. But this was Pat, trying to work through those things on the page so he didn't have to carry them around in his life. You see that in multiple books. And his goal, which he said overtly many times in private and public conversations, was to go as deeply into himself, into his own truth as he could, to put it on the page in the hopes that it would be meaningful to someone else, that even if it was just one reader out there, and we know it wasn't just one, he was able to say, you are not alone, that would be worthwhile. That would be an act of sacrifice worth committing. And the moment in this book when I see Pat sort of describing that, committing himself to it, so I'm describing it through metaphor, is at the very end of A Southern Way, the book within a book, with the spider. The spider is the only animal who dies. The spider sacrifices himself to save one of the girls. He bites one of the bad guys on the neck. He gets swatted, and the kids bury him in the backyard. And I won't remember the line exactly, but it's something like, as they bury the spider, they wished that his webs would always be pleasing to God, something like that. And Pat often described writers as being web spinners. That was a metaphor he used a lot. So, Nicole Seitz, who's co-editor of Our Prince of Scribes, explained to me one time from her vision that the spider is clearly Pat. This is Pat knowing that the writer's job is to sacrifice yourself, right? Commit yourself fully to your work in the hopes that you're going to save somebody, literally or figuratively, knowing that it's going to come at some price to you, that there will be ramifications for it. But you do it anyway because that's your craft and that's your commitment to your craft. And I think metaphorically that holds up.
Interesting. So Lynn made a comment. I never thought of that, and I've read it a dozen times. Thank you so much for that insight. So The Prince of Tides has obviously been turned into a movie, and I think the movie, while fantastic, is primarily the love story between Tom Wingo and Lowenstein. Do you recall if he was? I mean, I think the movie's fantastic, but was there ever any issue about the screenplay different, in the way that it was presented, or was it pretty well, hey, this is great, we love the way it's being put on the big screen?
Well, Pat and Barbara Streisand worked together on early versions of the screenplay. And Barbara Streisand wrote the foreword to Our Prince of Scribes, most of which is her 70th birthday letter to Pat, in which she describes how meaningful that relationship was, that they really were teacher and student to each other, and this wonderful friendship existed between them. And Pat always described not only the Prince of Tides movie, but all of the movies as being very good as movies, as visual storytelling of a segment of his novel. But he would also say every single time anybody criticized any of the movies, the book's still on the shelf, right? Nobody's changed a word of that. You can still play that movie in your imagination anytime you want. But he always said he had very good luck with movies, and he certainly knew writers who did not, who had, terrible adaptations made, not just terrible in terms of their relationship to the source material, but terrible as movies, terrible as visual storytelling. And that wasn't Pat's experience. Right. That said, there are a lot of people who come into the center because it's a literary center. Their devotion is to the book and not to the movie. That's what draws them there. And they have very strong criticisms about what is and isn't in the movie. And how much focus there is on the Lowenstein Tom Wingo relationship versus everything else, of course, that's in the movie, right? I mean, the tiger is barely in it. The Prince of Tides, the actual Prince of Tides, the title character, Luke Wingo, is barely in the movie called The Prince of Tides. So, as you probably know, Apple has recently bought the adaptation rights, the movie rights, or the screen adaptation rights, I should say. Ideally with the goal of developing a streaming series, something that, might be 8 to a dozen episodes long that could obviously be able to adapt much more of the movie, of the novel than we've seen on screen at this point. And I hope that comes to pass. I would love to see what that looks like. But Susie,
I hope so too.
Behind you that appears in the movie, and I would love to know a little more about that.
Sure. So, you guys, this picture behind me is a photograph by a local photographer named Delk, and it is the actual shrimp boat called the Tide Runner that was in the beginning of the Prince of Tides movie. It's here in the Low Country, and it's kind of falling apart. The marsh is taking it over. What's so interesting, though, it's a photograph, but the photographer did a process that makes it look like a painting. But the coolest part of everything is, if you can notice that bright teal blue frame, it actually comes from, I don't know how I'm gonna point at it, like the side rails of the boat. That is wood exactly from it. And you guys, I purchased this picture when I built my home on Ladies Island, and had no idea that we would have a virtual book club, that I would do 2 Low Country Literary Getaways focusing on Pat Conroy's novel, meeting Jonathan, meeting Karen. And it just kind of is one of these foreshadowing things sometimes that happens in our lives. And you got to come to the Low Country to see the painting or the photograph. And Karen is going to rejoin us, Jonathan, for the 2nd annual Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway in March. I still have 2 spots, you guys. Somebody out there needs to fill those 2 spots. So we've got a lot of excitement. We're going to bring the pages of life of this book, The Prince of Tides, by touring around Beaufort, by also going out to Fripp Island. We've had a little bit of a snafu, Jonathan, if you know anybody that does charter boat rides. The Fripper, that was going to be our ship, has to get new pontoons. So I'm currently creating an experience where we go to Gay Fish Company, and they're going to have some treats for us, and we can stand and look at the shrimp boats, and we can get a feel for that. And then we'll probably just have a lovely luncheon over on Fripp Island and take a walk on the beach instead of getting out of the water. But we're bringing the pages of life so people can learn more about Beaufort, experience with the 5 senses. And Lynn's giving me Captain George, so maybe I got to reach out to Captain George. But, yeah. So what did you like the best, Jonathan, about last year's getaway from your perspective? Because we do give a portion of the proceeds from the event to the Pat Conroy Center as a donation. What was your favorite part of it involvement?
It was so nice meeting all of these folks from around the country, both the writers and the readers, and getting to see Beaufort anew through their eyes if they had never been before. That's the best thing about what I do at the center. I meet so many people who've come for the first time and get to ask them, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing? And it's just magical to do that. But in terms of the events that we did, The Low Country Boil and the program we did out at Celadon, where some of the young high school students I mentor got to kind of tell Pat Conroy stories from their perspective, was really nice too. And coincidentally, that was my birthday, which you were very kind enough to acknowledge. First time I've had a surprise birthday party in a long, long time. So that's the memory that I hold most dear from that weekend. But it was just a joy to meet absolutely everybody.
Thank you. And Karen, what would you say was your favorite piece of the Low Country getaway experience for you?
Oh, golly. Well, there were so many things I enjoyed. Well, being at the center and hearing Jonathan tell so many stories, because you knew him so well, you knew Pat so well, and all the things that are assembled there at the center and the stories behind them. It was just really fascinating to me. I have to confess, I had never read anything by Pat Conroy nor seen any of the movies until we read, Cassandra's book about her life with Pat, but then The Water is Wide, and now The Prince of Tides. So to me, it was very much a learning experience and kind of catching up on things that I probably should have known already. But I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, Karen.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And I have one last question, and then we'll do final thoughts, because Jonathan's got a huge week this week. He needs to get his beauty rest. Shoshana once said, from the book, she interpreted the Prince of Tides as being Luke on page 662, but from the movie as Tom. Is that the right kind of observation, or is it supposed to be Luke?
I think by virtue of his near absence from the movie, Luke kind of stops being the Prince of Tides in the movie, and Tom becomes it. But if you read the book, it's clearly Luke. That phrase is assigned to Luke. What's interesting to me about that is so often Pat himself was referred to as the Prince of Tides. And if you think of Luke as being equated with that character, well, Luke, of the three siblings, Luke is the one least like Pat, right? Pat was the oldest of the 7 real Conroy siblings. He did not have an older brother. He used to refer to Luke as his first truly fictional character, meaning a character who wasn't based on anybody in his actual life, who he invented from his imagination as this kind of idealized big brother. But by virtue of Pat himself having been the big brother, I think he does, consciously or otherwise, insert a lot of himself into who Luke is. But Luke has this wonderful charm and innocence and connection to the natural world, an authentic sense of spirituality and faith that Pat maybe was aspiring to at that point in his life, but didn't necessarily feel that he had. So for me, Luke is always the Prince of Tides, even if he's not as omnipresent in the movie as he is in the novel.
Thank you for that. And Jonathan, do you have any last minute comments? So you I just want to thank you again for, I think, is this your 3rd time on our show, my little group? Or not show, it's not a show.
Yes, I will come back every time you ask me. This is always fun, Susie.
Well, we have to figure out what we're going to read next January. So we'll talk about that. And then in between, and then I've got to figure out how, if I turn into the grandmother and disappear for 6 months on a world voyage, who's going to hold on to the reins, Karen? Karen, who's going to hold on to it for 6 months? Anyway, but Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to let you do some closing comments, and then we'll say goodnight to you, and then Karen and I will do some business, and we'll say goodnight to everybody.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this year's getaway, because we're screening the movie Prince of Tides, and then we're going to talk about it. And we, in this case, is me with Ellen Malfris, fellow Conroy protege, novelist, poet, writer-in-residence at USC Beaufort. And Ellen has taught the novel to her students a bunch of times, and she has facilitated an hour-long book club discussion about the Prince of Tides for us. And Stephanie Austin Edwards will be with us for that, who, as we know from our previous interview, was one of Pat's classmates at Beaufort High School now, an award-winning novelist herself. And Bill Reynolds, local tour guide, is joining us as well, which is great because of the panelists, he's the one who knows actual facts, like real things about the movie that the rest of us would just be making up. So it's a nice group of experts, and we've never done this before. We've never had a panel discussion with this group discussing that movie. And it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I'm intentionally not watching it right now until March. I want to experience it with the rest of the group and say whatever I want to say in response to that moment. But I'm really looking forward to the chance to do it and to hear comments and questions from folks in the room, and we have that screening. So Susie, thank you so much for setting that up. I think that's going to be a really nice addition to this year's program, and I appreciate the chance to share some thoughts with you all tonight too.
Thank you again for your time, Jonathan, and I will see you after I journey to the end of the earth. I'm going to Antarctica.
Wow.
February. I know. I'm like, we got a little journey. I'm headed to Antarctica with my husband. Aurora Expeditions is giving me an opportunity to try the expedition. So leaving on the 16th of February, and I'll be back first part of March, and then coming straight to South Carolina. So
that's an incredible experience. Good for you and your husband. That's amazing.
Hopefully there won't be any Zodiacs overturning while I'm there. Thank you again, Jonathan.
You're so welcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye.
Thank you, Karen. Bye.
Bye. Wow. So, Karen, did you enjoy that tonight?
Oh, yes. I just love listening to him with his lovely accent, and he knows so much about Pat Conroy. So.
Yeah, it's so much fun, and I had a lot of activity today. I absolutely want to thank everyone that was making comments in the stream. I may have gotten most of them, but I may have missed some, so I apologize. It just makes it so enjoyable when we get different comments and questions as we go live. And I just wanted to advertise one more time, you guys. We've got 2 spots on the Low Country Literary Leisure Getaway. It's March 22nd through 26th. Feel free to message me for details. You can stay at the Beaufort Inn, or there are other options if you are looking for more of a residential setup. And the couple of things that I was going to share with you, Karen, because you may or may not know, I'm having a little bit of an issue with the boat, but maybe I have a resource because of this call tonight, because of this meeting. I'm going to reach out to a couple more people. We have added a brunch on Sunday morning that will feature Cassandra King, and we'll let her be the focused author for that event. And what we're doing a little bit differently this time is each of the featured authors that we have are kind of participating in their own event. So for an example, when we do the walking tour of Beaufort, we're going to do a deep dive into Trouble the Water and talking about Robert Smalls, and Rebecca Bruff will do that, the author of the historical fiction novel that started our whole virtual book club back in April of 2020. And yeah, I'm so excited about that. And then William Walsh is fantastic. He was going to be on the boat, and he's like, whatever works on Fripp, we'll do it. And I'm like, okay, we'll make a day out of it no matter what. And Seal and Lynn Selden are travel freelance writers and also novelists, and have a lot of experience and knowledge about the culinary scene here in Beaufort. And they're going to be taking us on a walking culinary tour where we get little bites at the different restaurants. So that sounds fantastic to me. I mean, you always get famished. And then Jonathan and Dana Ridenour will be, of course, at the Pat Conroy Literary Center, sharing with us their pieces there. We've got a special coffee time with poet Melissa St. Clair. And I'm forgetting something. I think that's about it.
Oh, the movie event that he described sounds that sounds really good.
Yeah, because I kept thinking, that it would have been really neat to last year, go back and sit down, get some popcorn out, and watch The Water is Wide, because there is a really good version of that out there that you can stream. And then we developed this idea, and I'm excited to sit back, have a little dinner, have a little movie snacks, and then have that wonderful conversation afterwards. So with the panel that Jonathan's put together. So.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions for me? And does anybody else have any questions out there? Oh, I've got a comment. You won't go hungry with me.
It's coming up, I guess.
I know it's coming really fast, especially when I got to leave the country again real quick. So it's coming really fast. And if anybody wants to talk to me, just message me or email me at Susie, SUSIE, at travelbysusie.com is my quickest email to get through. I could tell the other one, but it takes 5 minutes to spell it out. So,
would you be putting in writing the changes to the itinerary?
Yes. Yes, I'm going to create a minute-by-minute Travify itinerary, and we'll be sending that to everybody. That's on my to-do this week here in Beaufort, getting that all finished and finalizing the lunch options for the day that we are doing the walking tours. Remember last year we picked up lunch at the urban market and then we took it, we either ate it there or took it over to the Pat Conroy Center. We'll be doing something similar to that. So then as far as what are we doing now in February, there's 2 options for everybody to read. One, for those of you who have not read it, is Tell Me a Story, a memoir by Cassandra King that will bring all of this together. It's about her life with Pat Conroy. She has a lot of going back and forth in different parts of the Southeast, but a lot of focus on Fripp Island, and would love for you to read that. Those of you that are coming on the getaway before March 22nd, because it will really bring those pages to life for you when we're taking a walk on the beach and you see the sandbar and things like that. The other option is to read The Lioness, and it's by Mark Powell. Last summer, Dana Ridenauer introduced us to him, and he is also a professor at a local college. I'm forgetting right now off the top of my head, so I don't want to say the wrong thing. His novel was launched last summer, and so that would be another option to read, or for those of you that read fast, like Donette Lee, feel free to read both of them. And we will have meetings later in the month of March or April on those, okay? So we're going to close out. Karen, thanks for filling in as a group expert tonight. And all of you out there, please be thinking of who wants to help keep the reins going of this book club if I take what I made a deposit on, a time to go travel like Grandma Wingo.
Well, I'm trying to do some of that Grandma Wingo stuff too, so it'll depend. It'll depend on the timing. You might have to line up a few people.
I know. I definitely think we're going to have to be creative with that. So anyway, I really appreciate you joining me tonight. Thanks everybody for comments. And this was a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Bye.